I'd like to shift into our closing session, interaction and panel discussion about next steps. I'd like to welcome back to the screen, if you want to turn your cameras on, our four thought leaders and also the rest of our speakers from today. If you'd like to join us, Annabella Martin, Jay Moser, Eric Ravella, and Jamie Gerbrecht. And if you'll go ahead and advance the slide. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to cover some of the questions you all have written already that we haven't covered. But first, we want to go back to our thought leaders, ask for their input and thoughts about what has been covered here today, any nuggets that you see that come out of it, any things that we should be considering going forward, and then ask our speakers in terms of our subject matter experts, any last thoughts on golden nuggets out of this, and then we'll go to open it up for questions. Annabella, would you like to start?
Seem to be having a audio issue, Annabella. We can't hear you, but you can hear us, I think.
I tell you what, Annabella, while you're getting us sorted out, I know Jamie said he was ready to roll, so we'll let him go first.
So are you able to hear me okay, Bob?
You're coming loud and clear.
Very good. So several points I'd like to just share that I see as nuggets, and at least one from each of our key presenters today. Richard shared a point on how we should not reach for a template, to don't too quickly reach for a template, particularly one that would presuppose or limit us in terms of certain contract models. So don't just reach for what we've typically used in the past. I like what Keith shared about the 4 R's, one of those being ultimately to have the right team in place. And knowing that that's important, we want that team's collaborative input for planning, decision making, etc. So it's important that when we're getting that right team in place, that we have that perspective early enough on that we're going to want the input from that team early to make sure that we get the full value from their experience and knowledge and again, input. Paul shared that a collaborative project environment is more fun and energizing than would be an environment that's more adversarial. Eric and I and others have always said that about AWP. When you put in the right amount of structure and framework to where your project can be more organized and less chaotic, then it is a lot more fun and energizing. And so I see some similarity there, and it just points to how much when you're on an AWP project, if you can really get to that more collaborative environment, you're benefiting, you're getting the maximum value that you can move toward. He had a point, Paul had a point on one of his pages that I really liked, and that was that penetration of digital offers many ways to drive transparency and proactive collaboration. And once again, I love the connection there with advanced work packaging, because I would say penetration of advanced work packaging offers many ways to drive transparency and the valuable proactive collaboration that we're trying to bring about. Last point, I really enjoyed the references to safety today. We all know that's a big part of why we all are in the positions that we're in, and that is certainly recognized by this group of experts and thought leaders, and I love hearing that. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Jamie. Annabella, would you like to, are you able to connect or?
Yes, thank you, Bob. Yeah, so
Yes.
I would echo many of the things that Jamie has shared and would like to add that a couple of things that resonated with me which were mentioned by all of the speakers, really has to do with the power of the relationships that we're building within this industry, and how working together time after time, we can really make the improvements that are needed. So Paul mentioned the repeat supply chain type work, and how can we leverage EFAs or MSAs to really get to a level where we've learned time over time how to work with each other. So just very briefly wanted to share that with the group.
Right. Jay Moser?
No, I thought it was a great day. I was glad to see the attendance. I won't reiterate everything Jamie and Annabelle has said, but I think you got a little bit of insight with Paul being on the call today to the supply chain within Shell. I mean, it's obviously different within every company, but it really does take relationships to work. I mean, let's face it, you have to be able, whether you're a procurement contractor, a software provider, technology, doesn't matter. We just have to collaborate better. And I don't know what the answer is, but I know that this discussion is doing us some good. So that's a positive.
Good. Eric?
Yeah, great sessions. I took away a lot of learnings here. So I as what Jay just said, the focus on the relationship and what Paul had referenced, not the deal, right? Establish the partnership, not an arm's length relationship. I thought, Paul, you showed some real nuggets there in terms of on the examples and the formal relational contracts, and the 6 contracting norms or behaviors. I thought that was particularly insightful, and I thought Keith's examples in terms of putting it into the AWP context were really good. Again, Paul, I really enjoyed also that the idea that a good crisis really brings out the collaboration, and how do we get to this without a crisis? I never thought of it from that perspective before, but it is true that during a crisis, we certainly do end up collaborating more. And I think what Richard has provided us with is a bunch of really good mechanisms and documents and templates to march forward with in terms of a real path forward for those that are starting down this journey. So all in all, really good session. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, just my own personal observation, sitting where I sit within CII, working with the committees for business advancement and our sectors, I'm seeing these kinds of issues coming together in total collaboration, that all 5 of our sectors are talking to each other about these very similar problems, and lending support to the kind of research that this is creating the implementation of things for us. I want to turn to Paul, Richard, and Keith and see if they have any closing thoughts before we go to questions.
Well, mostly I want to thank everybody for their ears today and willingness to listen to what COA has done, and for inviting us here to talk about that. I really do appreciate it, and we do hope that people will take what we've created and make the best of it.
Yeah, no, my perspective is it's been a great opportunity to engage and hopefully in the next hour or so as well have a good dialogue and continue that in the chat rooms, as it were. I think for me, it's just interesting hearing the feedback from the thought leaders. I did make the point about certain transcendent behaviours, and I think you all seem to kind of pick up the behaviour and the relationship is key. And I think irrespective of the structures or the compensation models, I do personally believe that's really the secret sauce, as it were. And it's interesting that you kind of all picked up on that from my perspective. So yes, it's important we get the structure and the legal aspects all right, but let's also think about, regardless of the form, how we can all make our own little contribution to driving the right behaviours.
Stephen, if you go back to the previous slide of our subject matter experts, Tomorrow, you'll hear from all of these gentlemen and ladies about some of their examples of good collaborative projects. So we're looking forward to that. And any of them that are on the line, I see Michael DeBray is, that have any thoughts that you want to contribute in terms of your sitting in on today's sessions, that would be great too. If you're speaking, Michael, your phone, your mic is out.
There we go.
Yep.
You know, every time you do one of these things, you learn something. And I've worked with several of the speakers today and the thought leaders on various industry committees, and again, learned several things. The one in particular that struck me as something that I learned a while ago, but hadn't quite put in those words, was in the times of crisis, great change can happen. I have a saying that says, you know, it's only when there's times of change that opportunity really exists. Otherwise, we tend to do what works, and organizations become rigid in terms of their thinking because it works. So that was particularly good. You know, the thought process from Craig in terms of what we saw, the thinking that Shell went through is a similar process that we see a lot of organizations going through. Richard mentioned it, you know, they start with a pilot, start with something digestible, but it's an inevitable march towards finding better ways to run projects. And Bob, you and I sit on several CII committees where we see all kinds, and I think a couple of people mentioned OS2 today, which is a whole new operating system, just like what manufacturing went through. There are so many reasons that the industrial space has to move forward and catch up with its industry peers. And today laid a good foundation for some of the presentations that I know are coming tomorrow.
Great. Well, we've just opened up inside the comment box for you all, an opportunity for you to share golden nuggets out there in the audience, things that you're taking away from today's session. And indeed, on top of that, add any thoughts in Slido of things that we didn't cover that you would like to hear more about tomorrow in our presentations from the subject matter experts. So if you will take just a minute of that time to put that in. And in the meantime, let's go to the other questions we were not able to address earlier in the day. I don't know if that creates a problem for you, Stephen, asking to do two things at once, but.
No, I think, Robert, actually, if you're still on the moderator side of Slido, you should be able to click on the audience Q&A tab and read through some questions while the Golden Nuggets feedback is coming in.
Okay. Now, these are some, do you have any examples of a project that initially chose a lump sum strategy and then changed course? Well, I think I did ask this one. How do liquidated damages and other penalties have a place in lump sum collaborative contracting relationship?
So while you're looking, Bob, just back to that lump sum question. A lot of times when you're that far down the path where you've picked a lump sum compensation method, you've established already who your suppliers are, you've established by then typically your contract strategies. It's a little late to switch gears from a traditional contracting method into a collaborative method. It's not impossible, but a lot of the benefits you get from early supplier involvement in the decision making have kind of left the boat. So having looked at probably 400 or 500 collaborative contracting models and projects over the last 6 years, I haven't seen one that has switched compensation models that far into the project. It doesn't mean it's not possible. It doesn't mean there may not be some good reasons. It'll be specific to the owner, the group of contractors, and project circumstances, such as maybe with COVID, where projects were delayed, there's an opportunity to go back and do a rethink in terms of your approach.
I have another question that came in general. Do owner team sizes increase on collaborative contracting?
Yes, they do. Yeah, because
Is there a rule of thumb? You know, is it like 10%, 20%?
I would say it would differ with the size of the entities involved and the size of the project. Like a $2 billion project is going to have a lot more people involved, and with 7 parties, it's going to have a lot more people involved than a $20 million project with 3 parties involved. So but certainly the amount of people that would be involved as compared to a traditional model, I think would increase, because the collaborative model calls for the involvement of the various parties, where a traditional model does not. And so in order for all those parties to interact with each other, you're definitely going to have a much larger team earlier on, and you're going to have to spend time and effort getting them to get to know each other and getting to work together. So in my view, yes, the number will definitely be higher.
Yeah. Now this is sort of a related question. Which requires more owner resources to manage, lump sum or cost reimbursable?
I'll jump in. So back on the collaborative contracting question, I guess one thing I would say that as a caveat to a bigger owner team, I would say that ideally, if you have it set up right, you might have more owner people, but you would have less contractor people, because oftentimes you have less overlap in positions because it's an integrated team. At least with us, we often have, we have a construction manager, the contractors have a construction manager, and you have a lot of duplication. But with collaboration, you might be able to have an integrated team where you pick the best person with the best skills to be in that role versus the roles from individual companies. So there could be some efficiency there. On the lump sum reimbursable question, I would say it depends, and I always kind of say that. So I think they're different. People have different skill sets versus more. So for example, on reimbursable in general, on the owner side, you need a bigger emphasis on project controls, project controllers, like accountants. So you need more cost management and schedule forecasting management than you would on a lump sum, where the contractor's really doing a lot of that. But in other parts, you might need more quality assurance on a lump sum contract than maybe on reimbursable, where you can let the contractor do most of that and only sample. So I think it depends on your approach. Technically, on a lump sum, you could have a guy and a dog on that, where you just have one person who approves everything or makes decisions or pays the bills. So you could do that. I wouldn't recommend it, but I mean, you could. Whereas often with reimbursable, you have to do verification of expenditures, and so that requires a bigger team.
Can you comment on any specific software tools or technology that has enabled greater transparency and collaboration?
Certainly the building information management systems are core to that. But you're going to hear about that tomorrow, so I don't want to elaborate. But yes, there are those, and then there's a number of tools like project management tools that allow or enable collaboration around things like communication and transparency of information, and that are more likely to be used in a collaborative context, or are part of the formula for collaborative.
Yeah, maybe if I can just add on to that, while someone answers the phone. I think it may be useful not to focus too much on tools and systems, but more on having common data structures and driving interoperability. Because there's always going to be a different tool or a system. There's always going to be new developments and evolutions. But if you take, for example, the Cii data structure on AWP and using that as a common language, then you can overlay more than one different tool on that. But it'll make it easier to talk between, say, company and contractor systems. And then if you take that broader and look at the certainly in the oil and gas industry, the CFOS approach, and that's all very much similar to what's behind BIM. So I would encourage to think more on data structures and interoperability and less on the specific systems.
Yeah, and I think just to add quickly to that's the absolute right approach. The software tools change and evolve, and the leaders of today are trying to play catch up with the leaders of tomorrow. The key is for your project at your point in time, if you focus on data structures and the needs of not just the owner, but each of the key suppliers in the collaborative agreement, you get smart enough people, you'll pick the right tools.
We have a question here for the owners. If you could give the EPC community advice on implementing AWP principles, what would that be?
I can take a stab at it. That's a loaded question a little bit, but I mean, I think again, it's kind of the message that I talked about earlier. I mean, we go through these cycles of putting something that's different or a different way of working or a different tool out there, and then everybody seems to want to have their own space. What am I going to do with that? And that's my silo. And if it's the EP or the C or the whatever person it is or contractor it is within that contract tends to always say, well, that's different. How am I going to do things? So all I would say is it's a process, right? This is not a tool. It's not a technology. It utilizes the process, which helps you to really, the previous question that was just asked, helps you to collaborate, right? It has the right hand knows what the left hand's doing. It's if you can utilize some of these things like 4D technology where you can visualize that BIM 360 model that Richard mentioned and see how you're erecting your facility and have a discussion about it live rather than relying on a P6 schedule that might be 4 weeks old by the time it gets submitted and another week to review it, and you're reviewing old data. So your 30, 60, 90 and your day-to-day activities can be managed with the technology of today so much easier than they could in the past. So I would say my advice to an EPC is, one, follow the data requirements. Okay, we built them, CIIs, put them out there for a reason. If we all follow them, then it makes your life easier to work for whichever owner you're working for. Two, find an integrated tool set that works for you. It doesn't matter if it's, tool X, Y, or Z. The point is, what do you need to do with that tool to better the outcome, whether that's safety, quality, schedule, or whatever. So, those are my, I guess what I would say.
Okay.
Hey, Bob, I'll share some thoughts as well. Great response by Jay there. I would recommend to an EPC company and the individuals working there that they become familiar enough with what AWP brings to us to be able to assess the way they've always approached projects or the way they do projects and understand where they have opportunities to improve by applying the elements of AWP further. Because most companies already practice certain aspects of AWP to an extent. It's just that they don't get the full value from it because it's usually not as well structured and organized as what the research team from CII and COA came up with as the research team 272 report. So there's a bit of a familiarity training, just understanding AWP well enough to see that it's scalable, understand it well enough to be able to, as Dr. Bill O'Brien would talk about, to be able to take it and encode into your systems and work processes AWP in a way that it doesn't just turn your own systems and processes upside down, but rather it enhances them. And to see it as something that is, something that's going to bring more health to the way you approach projects. Back to Michael's answer on the scenario of the question on can you switch from a lump sum strategy to something more reimbursable or collaborative, and it was a great answer. A number of factors involved there. What have you learned along the way as you were going down that path of lump sum that's causing you to maybe need to make an adjustment? What parts of the scope are you looking at? Is it the construction part that you're looking at trying to decide lump sum or reimbursable or more collaborative, or is it a bigger piece of the overall project? Where are you in the project timeline? And you could have a scenario where what you've learned is telling you that you would benefit by transitioning to something that's more collaborative, more reimbursable. Keith Kritzer shared how if you're applying AWP and looking for those benefits, then if you're an owner that's at a level 3 maturity and the contractors that you're working with are level 1, 2, or 3, that determines how likely you are to be able to smoothly work AWP with that particular arrangement that you're going to have if you're going reimbursable versus lump sum. So you may find that what you're learning as you work through your strategy is moving you toward what could be a better scenario and a better strategy. It may take some time to make the transition, but you can find that it's worth it. And to remember, again, back to what Paul shared, it can be a lot more fun and energizing to work in a more collaborative environment. So if a company is sensing that the opportunity to transition to something different, and if it's to go in a more collaborative way, it's probably worth considering. Thanks, Bob.
Great, thank you. Another question, how do you ensure that focused contracting doesn't evolve into sole sourcing?
Yeah, I guess that's probably for me, is it? Yeah, yeah, indeed. So it's an interesting discussion. That question would almost imply that sole sourcing might be wrong, and it might not be. It depends a little bit on the circumstances. So you may well find that there's a specific technology or a specific location of operation, etc. And actually having that strength of wider supplier relationship gives you leverage or at least influence, so that in that challenging environment, you've got the opportunity to work together to deliver something that's commercially competitive, and you can work together. But indeed, we've had a few debates, not just internally in Shell, but also with members of our supply chain. I think there was a CEO from a major EPC that came up with the term, we need to have co-competition, yeah, which is cooperation and competition together. Yeah, so I think if you're working with should we say a more limited number of parties in the supply chain over say multiple projects or multiple years, it's important to be clear on what good looks like, what's the competitive targets or outcomes that you want to achieve together. And if you continue to achieve those against industry benchmarks, there's no reason to stop. But if not, ensure that there's clear off-ramps, or make it clear that you may go back to a more competitive approach or a different alternative in order to provide that. That need not be on a whole portfolio. It could just be part of the work you do with them, part of the projects. Because maybe in a certain area they're more or less competitive, depending on experience. So, but yeah, I think if you're in an environment that kind of demands competition, it is a little bit more challenging. But I did share the example of our Gulf of Mexico surf strategy, where we have a structured competitive competition, but we seek to bring in the insights from the wider supply chain. And of course, you have to carefully manage that and make sure you protect each party's interests You know, by having good feedback and good relationships, it actually becomes quite empowering. So a little bit like Keith's earlier answer, you know, it is a little bit, you know, horses for courses, but don't be scared of single source if all the factors are telling you that it's the best outcome, and then use the relationships to make that the most effective approach when you've got limited constraints.
Good. Another question is the IPI reimbursable pain gain scheme with insured cost overrun looks almost too great. What are the cons? What risks with such scheme?
Yeah, I mean, I had that in my slide. I've got to say, I also thought the same. So this looks pretty good. Now, I think part of the challenge probably is that what's the extent of what's insurable? Yeah, so who's able to underwrite, say, a mega project type aspect? What would be the size of the premium? And you know, is actually the insurance market in the best position to give you the most cost-effective coverage of that risk? So the advantages are that, you know, by pooling, you know, and then paying the premium together, you should actually be putting less contingency money into the overall price, and then you only, you know, maybe one of the downsides is that you're still paying a premium, and maybe the risk doesn't trigger. And, you know, an alternative approach, which I think some of the OS2 researchers exploring in CII is, you know, should that be held at the company or the principal level? And if the company has, you know, A or AA grade type credit rating, are they able to absorb and get that risk protected at a better rate than, say, a contracting company that might be, you know, B or BB or BBB? Yeah. So I think that the whole concept of who's in the best position to get the insurance or to cover the risk and then get the best deal on it is one that could be applicable, and maybe in some contexts company or company consortium insuring rather than the insurance industry might be a better approach.
Good. Here's an example. Here's a question for an example. Do you have an example of a collaborative contract with more than two parties, i.e. an EP contractor and a C contractor, both being parties to the contract with the company?
Yeah, some of the integrated project delivery models have many signatories, you know, like a dozen signatories who sign a joining agreement to one contract. So everybody has the same deal, more or less. And there's plenty of examples of that can be found in the Integrated Project Delivery Association website, where they have some pretty detailed information. I can tell you, you know, projects that I know of, like in the city of Red Deer, for example, they've done all sorts of public infrastructure. That's a city in Alberta, by the way, between Calgary and Edmonton. And they've done a lot of public infrastructure projects using IPD and IPD-ish models, and most of them are poly-party agreements, just like you described.
Yeah, I think one of the examples I quoted was the Heathrow Terminal 5 expansion, and I think that's a very good example of multiple partners and a common agreement. And there's a lot of literature available in the public domain for those that might want to dig into that.
Okay.
Yeah, and tomorrow you guys will see a great example of a current project that has 5 parties, including the owner.
Great.
Can I, Bob? There was a question on sharing of intellectual property. Can I quickly take that question?
Oh, please take it.
Yeah. So the question was really, you know, how do you get collaboration when you have IP constraints? And this is really about a bigger question of how do you get innovation with IP constraints? And we looked at this recently in a webinar. And so one of the things that can be done is to have conversations about what is confidential, and sort of restrict that urge, in particular in the legal department, to call everything confidential information, when in fact it's really not, and to try to create a thinner definition of what that is, so some of that project information can be shared around without the usual blanket, what I would call blanket treatment. The other treatment that I've seen is that there is intellectual property constraints for commercial applications, and then there's for project applications. And if you split those, and you take the commercial out of that, you can agree to share information within the context of the project to get the project done and to innovate within the context of the project, and set aside the commercial question for later, in the sense is that you don't get caught up in the discussion of how much is this worth and who's going to make money off of it. If you split the commercial from the project usage, you can avoid a lot of that conversation. And the third method I've seen is where a third party actually takes ownership in some kind of a trust arrangement, not quite an escrow, but basically they take ownership of all the intellectual property that's created so that nobody in the project owns it, and then which kind of takes away the whole competition. So around the IP. So there's 3 ways I can suggest of how to sort of manage around that. All of them are somewhat innovative, and all of them will require likely some conversation with the legal department.
You know, that's a sticky one when it comes to some of the technologies that go into some of these facilities. And Richard named, 3 really good approaches. The whole concept of collaboration helps you get through those conversations. But at the end of the day, not all suppliers and not all owners are ready for collaborative contracting. And IP can be one of the roadblocks that gets in the way.
Yeah. So can any of the panel offer thoughts on how owners can steer collaborative strategies that flow down the supply chain? How and how early can we engage?
Well, one way to do it is make a public declaration that you're going to that collaboration is one of the ways you're going to evaluate your suppliers. That'll get them interested in collaboration pretty quick. Just at a high level, if you're looking at using the supply chain process to encourage collaboration, that's one incentive-based approach.
Yeah, I mean, another approach that we're taking, and it doesn't necessarily work for all projects and all jurisdictions. We mentioned earlier, I think someone mentioned, we're using frame agreements. So we don't just have frame agreements for EPC or engineering services, but for major equipment, fabrication yards, etc. So, and a project we're developing now, we're actually pre-selecting the main equipment suppliers at a very early stage, and they're getting them all to work together between a nominated EPC, the major equipment suppliers, fabrication yards, and also 2 or 3 licensors. Yeah, a little bit of an experiment, but it is informed by positive experience we had on another project where we didn't set it up that way, but that was the outcome after some of the tendering. So, basically, a bit like the example I shared, we kind of realised after the work that the agreements we had in place were still very competitive, and so we decided not to reinvent a tendering process, but rather build on those existing relationships. So we're now trying to bring that in the kind of a pre-feed phase to help each party influence each other and try and get the best outcome.
Yeah. So what we've seen is ask your supply chain early, bring them in early, tell them, Richard's bang on, tell them what you're thinking, ask them to respond to an expression of interest, formally, informally, get out and speak to them, involve your own supply chain early, because they can sometimes be the biggest roadblocks, and let them know that you want the key principles to be extended all the way down through each of your key suppliers, so their own supply chains, particularly the mission critical pieces that are key to the project at hand.
Good. So this is a little outside the box, but it is about collaboration. Is it possible for the owner to lead a collaborative approach in an owner-only setting. The setting that's given here is OSHA.
Sure. Just like, you know, we've got the concept of entrepreneurships, collaboration doesn't have to be just with external organizations.
Right.
Particularly in the really big organizations. I think some of the guys and gals at the table can talk to collaboration within your own organizational silos isn't always the best, right? So absolutely, it can happen within a single organization.
Safety is a good one to have a conversation about because people are very aligned on that topic.
Right. Another question, can you share a failed case of collaborative contracting and the lessons learned from that experience?
Actually, unfortunately, I think all of us can. I can tell you really case as in there was recently, and if I was given an email, I could email what the reporter series on this one is, but there was a case that there was an arbitration that actually was not accepted. There was an arbitration result. It was an IPD contract that failed and then went into an arbitration, and the outcome of that arbitration was not accepted by one of the parties, and they actually tried to get judicial review of that arbitration, which was basically like an appeal of the arbitration. Not easy to do, by the way, because the bar to jump over is rather high. And one of my legal colleagues posted a story about this in a collaborative contracting committee where the judge recognized that this is a collaborative contract. In that case, it was the IPD nature, but no one followed it. And so they ended up, getting into an argument with each other, into dispute. And that resulted in a claim, and it all became public through this appeal or judicial review procedure. But typically, because a lot of these arrangements are covered by arbitration, you never hear about them because arbitration is confidential. That's in fact one of the main benefits of arbitration is you keep your dirty laundry in the hamper. And so it's not that common to hear about these cases except for anecdotally within a peer network. And so in that case, I'll let my peers talk about it, but publicly it's much harder to find because of those confidentiality restrictions.
Anybody else?
So I can't point to a failed project, but what I can point to is several pieces of research that have done deep studies, and the failure rates are not high. But in each and every case, it comes back to the fact that the team selection, the culture of the team wasn't set up properly. Richard mentioned it with respect to when they didn't follow their collaborative processes. And so one of the key lessons learned in collaborative contracting is if one of your partners is going to fail with them fast and replace them, right? It's all about the people. It's all about having commitment from your suppliers, key executives to make this work. And if an individual isn't working, to replace them fast. Doesn't mean they're bad people, it just means that this is not a strategy for them to work within.
Is data available to map successful collaborative contracting within different industries, such as the power, oil and gas, mining, and technology?
I don't know, Mike, have you seen, it's hard to find industry studies because they cost money to do, and it's hard to keep them current. So I was curious.
So when we did and you'll hear some of this tomorrow, so I don't want to steal too much of tomorrow's thunder, but when we did the original research for industrial IPD, we looked at 85 industrial projects, and it covered power, oil and gas, mining, and technology. And you've heard the term today, I forget whose presentation it was in, IPD-ish or collaborative-ish. So the reality is collaborative contracting is gaining a head of steam in the industrial space. It's not there widely. That's why we're having this conference. We as an industry have learned from the infrastructure world down under in Australia and New Zealand, and we've learned from the institutional and hospital worlds up here through IPD, and you'll hear about that tomorrow. There's not a lot of pure play industrial integrated project delivery projects. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't some a scattering of projects that are using IPD, what we'll talk about tomorrow, commercial IPD, and applying it to industrial projects. There's at least 5 or 6 that I can think of. There's a bridge project, there's a nuclear project up in Canada. There's, so it's coming, and the fact that you guys are all on this conference together, it means you're right at the beginning of this. I mean, you heard from 2 companies today that says they're interested, they're trying it, they're experimenting with it, but it's not a core delivery method yet. And that's consistent with all the power companies that I speak with and the mining companies.
Any suggestions on what contracting strategies are beneficial to manage multiple projects with the same vendors? I see 100 projects per year using a single vendor.
Yeah. Well, let me give you my thoughts on that, and I come out of working with oil and gas. I think depending on the size of your capital spend per year, there probably comes there is a point where you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. And I can't see any of the large spenders in the industrial capital space picking a single vendor or single set of vendors. That doesn't mean you don't go to 3, 4, 5. And the challenges with reducing it too small is you leave out competition, you leave out innovation, and that's the crux of the challenge. How do you get the efficiencies of doing the same things with the same people all the time and get all those learning things and streamline that down, doing what automotive did as an example, but at the same time bring in innovation and bring in competition, because we're human beings. We can get comfortable in a relationship that doesn't challenge us.
Okay.
I guess, Michael, I'd maybe to challenge a little bit on that topic. I think what you said is correct, but I think there are situations, and I'm not sure who asked the question, but what context it is here. But I oversaw, $200-300 million a year with hundreds of projects for many years in one of our sites. And in doing so, we came up with an arrangement where we said, look, we're going to look at the 5-year look ahead, and we're going to put it together and say, look, instead of being $200 million a year, it's now $10 million because we're looking at 5 years. Could we make that relationship robust enough where we could make it equal on both sides, and where we could put, good incentives, but good penalties to go with it? I saw some questions in here about penalties and liquidated damages. Let me just say, IPA would tell you incentives don't work, but I would tell you that my experience is if you have an incentive, you better have a penalty. Bad incentives don't work, that's correct, but there are good incentives that do work. So if you're managing a small portfolio every year of hundreds of projects, depending on the market, I think it also is very, very telling. So the CP group and like Paul and others need to tell us, if we are, contractor limited, that may not be the right approach. If work is full everywhere, then, you might need to do something different. If it's a slow market, then you would change that approach. So it's very market dependent.
You're absolutely right, and conditional. I mean, there's lots of examples even in the past where owners entered into these long-term 5-year, 10-year contract arrangements, not necessarily collaborative, but traditional. Lots of examples where they worked well. But the challenge is as you start to get into the multi-billion-dollar and tens of billions of dollars, you have a footprint on the industry. So size of the 100 projects matters. Jurisdictions you cover matter. Market conditions matter. Certainly seen it in the industrial space, particularly with maintenance contracts, where there's been lots of long-term strategic alliances, or what CII calls partnering. That's happened over the last 20 years.
Stephen, I'd like to go to you after this one last question to see if you gleaned any nuggets from our attendees. And the last question that I have is, people are key. How do we overcome challenges in attracting the best resources, the elusive A-team, if everyone is offering collaboration and incentives?
Easier said than done, I would say. There's a lot of talk about how the upcoming generations of workers are more interested in collaborative working type of arrangements. And people will talk about that being part of their values or that being part of how they organize themselves. But the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, is that it's more than just talking about it. You actually have to be good at it. And I think different organizations will prove that they do or they don't. And the market will figure that out, as it always does. And people will stay away from organizations that say they're collaborative but are not, and go towards the organizations that say they're collaborative and actually are. And anyway, so that's sort of my view of it.
Anybody else? Well, I see Stephen has posted what has come out of the request of our attendees. Stephen, you want to describe what you put together?
For sure, yeah. So what we see on screen here is a word cloud, basically a collection of 1 or 2 word statements or short statements from the attendees, basically about their highlights from what they saw and heard in today's sessions. As you can see, the most commented words are the largest: collaboration, trust, transparency, relationship. These are the key themes that the attendees are picking up on. And so I'll let the presenters take a look through this, and I guess let me know what it inspires for you and what additional comments you might have for attendees based on the feedback here. And this is live, by the way, so new comments are still rolling in.
Great, and this will be, even though we're slowing this down, people could be putting this materials into this even after we close the session, right?
Yeah, we will leave this up live. I'd encourage everyone just to go back to the technology slide from the kickoff this morning. We
Please
definitely
do.
encourage you. Sorry?
Please do.
Yeah, please go back to FeedLoop and please go back to Slido and continue to make your comments and questions in the chats and in the polls. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, as we before we close out, I do want to thank again all of our speakers and our thought leaders today, all of you for attending. Thank our summit sponsors, Shell, Autodesk, Hilti, PTAG, Digital Construction Works, Capital Project Services, Collaboration Contracting Community, Durham School, Bilius, COA, ECI, and ECITB, who will be speaking tomorrow. And if you will go ahead and put up the slides that follow, which cover some upcoming events. We do have more besides tomorrow's session. If you want to put those up.
Absolutely, yeah. One moment, please.
Yeah, shifting gears, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry about that. Ah, great. Here we are. Okay. There you go.
So we have the CII Annual Conference. This will be the first face-to-face for many of us under the coming out of COVID-19. It's August 2 to 4 in Orlando. Our CBAs are all meeting on the 2nd, and actually on August 5th, our sectors are meeting. So take a look at that. Go to the CII website. You can learn more. This is a joint conference between CII and CURT. And if you go to the next, I think you have a series of upcoming other workshops. AWP for the power sector, September 14 and 15. And these will be in the deck that you'll be getting. AWP and Lean, Stronger Communities in late September. Another virtual event like this. AWP conference in Houston in 2021, and hopefully we will have we have more people face to face at that particular point in time, but it will have a virtual component. And I believe there's one more. AWP for the mining sector, November 18 and 19. Well, thank you all for your, I'm sorry, AWP for the infrastructure sector, December 13 and 14. It looks like New York City being torn up to me. Thank you all. And do any of our thought leaders or speakers today have any closing thoughts before we dismiss until tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Central?
Just thanks for listening to us.
Well, thank you all for your presentations. Look forward to the follow-up, and we'll be addressing some of the questions we weren't able to address in the time provided. Thank you. Have a good evening. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.